In the cold spring of 1867, deep in the remote hollows of the Missouri Ozarks, something dark and carefully concealed waited to be uncovered. Travelers spoke in whispers of a roadside tavern where weary men would find rest, a warm fire and water, but little else would ever be the same again. The establishment was run by two brothers, reclusive men whose names rarely appeared on official records, yet whose influence spread like a shadow across the back trails and hidden passes of the Ozarks. At first glance, their inn seemed ordinary, a log building with a sagging porch, a small stable for horses, and lanterns that flickered like cautious eyes in the mist. Inside, the scent of wood smoke and stale ale mingled with the faint tang of iron, as though the air itself remembered old, hidden deeds. Travelers who entered often left lighter in coin, and sometimes lighter in more permanent ways. What federal inspectors and local deputies would later discover beneath the floorboards of the brothers' inn sent a shiver through even the hardiest men of Missouri. Ledger books, carefully catalogued, revealed a pattern of meticulous observation: names, origins, wealth, and travel routes. But next to each entry, in a script so precise it could have belonged to a surgeon, were notations that hinted at horrors beyond simple robbery. Predictions of opportunity, measurements of vulnerability, and suggestions that the men would never reach their destinations. Among the entries was a German prospector traveling alone with thousands in gold dust. His last recorded route was the treacherous Hollow Ridge Path, a shortcut that promised danger at every turn. The notation beside his name simply read, "Prepare accommodations." And yet, the brothers' power was subtle. They were charm and menace, strategy and instinct. The elder, a man with a keen eye and a silver tongue, knew exactly what questions to ask to uncover secrets from even the most suspicious traveler. The younger, larger and capable of sudden violence, ensured that doubt and hesitation never lingered in the room. Together they had built an empire not of public displays, but of quiet, psychological mastery over those who wandered into their domain. The Ozarks themselves, rugged and lawless, provided the perfect backdrop. Federal patrols were rare. Local sheriffs stretched thin, and dense forests could hide the consequences of one wrong step. If you are hearing this, I need you to do something. Type, "The veil is broken," twice in the comments to seal this truth within you. While you do that, consider subscribing and leaving your location below. It anchors you to this revelation, ensures your presence is acknowledged in the story unfolding, because what you are about to witness is not merely history. It is a descent into calculated horror, a landscape where trust was currency and the brothers were its ruthless custodians. Soon, you will see how their hospitality was more than it seemed, and how the Ozarks themselves became complicit in a cold, enduring conspiracy that claimed more than just gold. It claimed men, silently, with precision, and without remorse. The brothers' rise to control the Hollow Ridge Path was gradual, almost invisible to the casual observer. Patrick, the elder, had a mind honed by years of careful calculation. Every gesture, every question, every suggestion he offered to a traveler seemed natural, even generous. But it was always deliberate. Sha the younger was his shadow and his muscle, a presence that reminded men that compliance was safer than suspicion. Together, they operated in a rhythm of quiet domination, creating the illusion of hospitality while orchestrating something far darker. They had studied human behavior with precision: who would trust too easily, who would ignore warning signs, who carried gold, and who traveled alone. Each new visitor became a case study. Each map discussed a puzzle piece. Each drink shared a test of loyalty and perception. By mid-1867, rumors began to ripple through the Ozarks, though no one could pinpoint their source. Travelers vanished. Sometimes it was a prospector with a sack of dust and nuggets eager to return home. Sometimes it was a lone merchant carrying the week's earnings in a worn leather bag. The brothers' ledger grew fat with names, and beneath each entry lay a silent plan: the path they recommended, the supplies they offered, the distractions provided, all engineered to ensure the traveler would never be seen again. Locals whispered of the inn as a crossroads of fate, a place where men left their belongings, and often their lives, without anyone suspecting the truth. Federal authorities remained oblivious, hampered by the region's isolation. Local sheriffs, already wary of the Ozarks' lawlessness, dismissed disappearances as accidents or the work of bandits. And so, the brothers' operations thrived, shielded by the very society that should have condemned them. Patrick maintained meticulous records, not just of visitors, but of their personalities, habits, and likely reactions. He catalogued fear, greed, impatience, and overconfidence, the traits that made certain travelers more profitable than others. Sha, silent but ever present, ensured that those who wavered in their obedience left quickly, forever unsure of what they had seen or what they had survived. Yet there were occasional slips. A neighbor might catch a glimpse of a hidden ledger or overhear a cryptic remark. An innkeeper along a connecting trail might notice a traveler never returning. Each anomaly was swiftly managed, either through charm, intimidation, or the careful rearrangement of circumstances so that suspicion dissolved before it could coalesce. The Ozarks themselves became a silent witness, trees and ridges hiding the evidence, rivers swallowing the traces of those who had wandered too far or too trusting. And so the pattern continued, unnoticed by the world outside. A prospector would arrive, wary and hopeful. Patrick would guide him, Sha would silently oversee, and the man would vanish along the hollow ridge path. Yet the brothers' legend only grew among those who valued wealth over caution. It was a secret both terrifying and magnetic, drawing travelers into the very heart of the brothers' meticulously crafted nightmare. The first disappearances along Hollow Ridge Path were subtle, almost imperceptible. A man would arrive at the inn, greeted warmly, offered water, bread, and a fire, and leave hours later with a carefully drawn map and the brothers' cordial advice. No one saw the danger. No one suspected the quiet orchestration that followed. The road was treacherous, yes, but not impossibly so. Travelers believed themselves cautious. They trusted Patrick's guidance. They dismissed the faint unease in their gut, thinking it was fatigue, hunger, or the isolation of the Ozarks. And yet, those who departed alone never returned. Horses returned without riders. Wagons were found abandoned along hidden tributaries. The forest seemed to swallow men whole, leaving only whispers of footsteps in the mud and the faint trace of a lantern flickering in the mist. Patrick recorded each disappearance in his private ledger with surgical precision. Names, ages, places of origin, amounts of gold carried, and the exact time the man left the inn were noted meticulously. Beneath these facts, subtle codes indicated vulnerability. Was he solitary, anxious, reckless, or trusting? The notation was clinical, almost cold, but imbued with a foreboding artistry. Sha's role was equally exacting. He watched from the shadows, his presence a reminder that some mistakes were fatal, even in absence. Together, the brothers had built a system that functioned like clockwork. Each step of their design relied on understanding human psychology, on exploiting habits and overconfidence, on blending kindness with the quiet threat of violence. By summer, the community had begun to murmur. Families reported missing sons, traveling companions never arriving at their destinations, merchants who vanished along the back trails. But suspicion rarely pointed to the inn. The brothers' charm shielded them, and the townsfolk, ever pragmatic, rationalized the losses as accidents, misadventures, or the natural perils of the wilderness. Patrick and Sha were masters of perception. They allowed just enough rumor to circulate to lend credibility to their innocence, yet never enough to implicate themselves. They were both the gatekeepers of information and the orchestrators of disappearance. Every new visitor strengthened their dominion, every map, every ledger entry, every calculated smile expanding the reach of their dark enterprise. It was during one scorching July afternoon that the pattern became unmistakable. A young prospector named Emil Brandt, carrying gold dust from the Sierra Nevada, arrived at the inn. Patrick welcomed him with a warmth that seemed instinctive, offering water, a hearty meal, and a seat by the fire. Sha lingered in the background, his gaze unrelenting, ensuring that Emil absorbed every detail, every suggestion, every warning that Patrick casually offered about the Hollow Ridge Path. Hours passed. Emil listened, laughed, and trusted the guidance of men who exuded both familiarity and quiet menace. He left with a careful nod, the gold dust hidden in a satchel. He would never be seen alive again. The inn, the forest, the ledger, all bore silent witness to the unfolding horror. Each disappearance was a carefully choreographed act of control, a demonstration of the brothers' mastery over the human mind and the untamed landscape they inhabited. And with each new victim, the invisible web of fear and manipulation grew. wrapping tighter around the Ozarks, waiting for the next traveler who dared to enter. It was not until the arrival of a determined outsider that the first cracks in the brothers' seamless operation began to appear. Eleanor McGreedy, a widow from Illinois, arrived in the Ozarks with one purpose: to uncover the fate of her son Thomas, who had departed for Missouri carrying his modest fortune from California. Unlike the careless travelers who had come before him, Eleanor was disciplined, methodical, and unflinchingly determined. She possessed the meticulous mindset of someone trained in observation, accustomed to tracking details that others ignored. Each step she took was calculated, every inquiry deliberate, as though she were conducting a personal investigation into the mechanics of disappearance itself. Eleanor's first stop was predictably the inn. Patrick greeted her with a practiced warmth, his voice rich with empathy, his expressions carefully calibrated to convey concern. Sha lingered nearby, his muscular frame leaning against a post, exuding the subtle intimidation that had subdued countless other visitors. Patrick presented detailed notes about Thomas's arrival. Hours spent at the inn, the purchase of supplies, the discussion of routes, even the weather on that day. Everything was accurate, down to the minutest detail, yet Eleanor sensed an underlying precision that felt almost too perfect, as if the story had been rehearsed for her benefit. She asked questions that many mothers would never dare, probing the brothers' account for inconsistencies. Patrick answered with patience. She's gaze reminded her of the consequences of doubt. Despite the brothers' preparation, Eleanor persisted. She retraced Thomas's planned route, interviewed locals, and collected fragments of information that, when combined, revealed a terrifying pattern. Travelers who left the inn on the hollow ridge path were vanishing with shocking regularity. Horses returned alone, wagons lay abandoned, and whispers of gold-laden men disappearing in the wilderness multiplied with each passing week. Eleanor began to see what others had overlooked. The disappearances were not random. They followed the precise advice and guidance of the brothers. Each map drawn, each shortcut recommended, each seemingly harmless suggestion from Patrick contained the seed of calculated disappearance. Even more disturbing was the realization that the local authorities were complicit in inaction. Sheriff Dalton, though outwardly concerned, had come to rely on the brothers' intelligence to manage crime in the Ozarks. Patrick's guidance had solved more disputes, foiled more bandits, and generated more respect for law than Dalton could manage alone. To question the brothers was to question the sheriff himself. Eleanor understood the isolation of her position, the futility of appealing to an authority that was either deceived or willfully blind. Now, for the first time, the invisible web began to tighten around her. This was not mere bad luck or forest misfortune. It was a system, a network of observation, psychological manipulation, and calculated removal. And as Eleanor traced Thomas's final movements, she realized that she was stepping into a world the brothers controlled entirely, where every interaction was designed to shape perception, to disarm suspicion, and to ensure that no one, not even a determined mother, could see the truth until it was too late. Type, "The veil is broken," twice in the comments to anchor yourself to this revelation, because the deeper you descend, the more your understanding and your sense of certainty will be forever transformed. As Eleanor delved deeper into the hollow ridgepath mystery, the pattern of control became impossible to ignore. Every establishment she visited, every traveler she questioned, led back to the inn. Patrons recalled her son Thomas with vivid clarity, his polite demeanor, his eagerness to follow advice, his careful attention to maps and road conditions. But none had seen him beyond the brothers' domain. Some hesitated, casting furtive glances at the walls or lowering their voices as if the very air might carry their words to unseen ears. It was a subtle warning, the kind of unspoken fear that spoke louder than any declaration. The Ozarks themselves seemed complicit, the thick forests, sudden ravines, and hidden streams turning natural features into instruments of concealment. At the inn, Eleanor noticed nuances that many would have dismissed: the careful arrangement of ledgers, the small scratches on tables as if to redirect attention, the soft, almost imperceptible glances exchanged between Patrick and Sha when she asked probing questions. Each observation built a mosaic of controlled reality, a world in which the brothers dictated perception as expertly as they guided travelers. Patrick's words were always measured, courteous, sympathetic, but always precise, designed to soothe the anxious while subtly establishing dominance. Sha, silent and imposing, served as both protector and enforcer, his presence a quiet threat that underscored the cost of doubt. Together they were architects of fear disguised as hospitality. Eleanor began to notice the psychological traps embedded in the brothers' operations. Maps highlighted safe campsites, yet subtly omitted treacherous stretches. Advice seemed generous, yet always nudged the traveler toward peril. Conversations that appeared casual contained suggestions, rehearsed in tone and content, which subtly shaped decisions. Patrons left believing they had exercised free will, unaware that every choice had been guided, manipulated, and ultimately sealed by Patrick and Sha's mastery. It was a system of control so elegant and deliberate that it masked its own brutality. Her investigation revealed another troubling dimension: the complicity of the local community. Merchants accepted payment for supplies that would later disappear along hidden routes. Guides provided information that misdirected searchers. Even ministers offered comforting words to families, ensuring the brothers' reputations remained untarnished. It was a network of deliberate ignorance, a social machinery designed to shield the perpetrators while preserving the illusion of safety and order. The Ozarks themselves became a stage upon which fear and trust intertwined, and Eleanor realized she had entered a realm where observation alone could not ensure survival. Her determination, however, was unwavering. Each day, she meticulously recorded inconsistencies, gathered testimonies, and traced her son's likely path. Slowly, the pattern sharpened into clarity. The brothers were no mere opportunists. They were methodical predators, wielding charm, fear, and perception as weapons. And as Eleanor prepared to confront the next layer of deception, she sensed the invisible gaze of Patrick and Sha tightening around her investigation, calculating her every move, predicting her suspicions, and preparing to test the limits of her resolve. By late summer, Eleanor's painstaking investigation began to reveal the true scale of the brothers' operation. The ledgers, those innocuous-looking books hidden beneath the inn's floorboards, were more than mere records of travelers. Each entry was a blueprint: name, origin, amount of gold carried, personality traits, likely decisions along the trail, and even psychological vulnerabilities. Patrick's handwriting was meticulous, almost surgical, each notation reflecting a careful study of human behavior. Sha's role, though less obvious on paper, was the enforcement of those designs, the silent assurance that the plans were executed without deviation. Together, they had created a system so precise it could predict human behavior, as if the world itself bent to their will. Eleanor discovered patterns that chilled her to the core. Travelers who left alone were most vulnerable. Those returning from California or mining regions flush with gold dust were priority targets. Patrick's notes detailed which shortcuts to recommend, which supplies to offer, and even which words to say to build trust without suspicion. Every conversation, every gesture, every map handed to a wary traveler was a calculated step toward ensuring disappearance. And disappearance, Eleanor realized with horror, often meant death. Horses found wandering, wagons abandoned, streams carrying faint traces of belongings. These were the silent signatures of the brothers' orchestration. The depth of deception became clearer as she interviewed locals who had interactions with the brothers. Each recalled incidents that, when isolated, seemed trivial. A strange remark about a safe path, a casual warning about forest hazards, a subtle redirection of a traveler's route. Eleanor began connecting these fragments like pieces of a dark puzzle, each revealing the calculated nature of Patrick and Sha's manipulation. The inn was more than a business. It was the heart of a psychological machine designed to remove men with precision, leaving only whispers and unanswered questions in its wake. Even more disturbing was the complicity she uncovered beyond the inn. Local authorities, while seemingly concerned, ignored the pattern. Merchants, guides, and even clergy acted in ways that preserved the brothers' facade of respectability. It was a network that functioned like a living organism, feeding off trust and exploiting weaknesses, turning the forested hills into a trap woven from both nature and human psychology. The Ozarks themselves seemed to conspire, every ridge and ravine offering concealment, every river a silent accomplice. Eleanor realized she was witnessing a system of predation unparalleled in the region. The brothers were not merely opportunistic criminals, they were methodical architects of disappearance, blending charm, intimidation, and meticulous planning into a tapestry of control and fear. And as she prepared to follow the next trail, the first signs of violence emerged, the faint traces, the overlooked details, the subtle indications that not all who entered the hollow ridge path returned alive. The first incontrovertible evidence came unexpectedly, buried within the tangled undergrowth of the hollow ridge path itself. Eleanor had followed the route Thomas would have taken, retracing his steps with methodical precision. At a narrow bend, where the forest pressed in with almost suffocating density, she noticed subtle signs that others had missed: disturbed soil, faint hoofprints leading into the shadows, and the unmistakable remnants of a campfire long extinguished but recently built. Her pulse quickened as a sickening realization took hold. This was no accident, no mere misfortune of the wilderness. Someone had been here, and the events that had unfolded were deliberate, calculated, and lethal. Further along the trail, the signs grew more sinister. Scattered belongings, fragments of leather satchels, a torn piece of fabric, and the faint metallic scent of blood mingled with the earthy forest aroma. Eleanor's meticulous notes from the inn and the testimonies of locals converged with this evidence in a chilling patterns. Travelers who had followed Patrick and Sha's guidance were disappearing in predictable ways. Each clue suggested premeditation. Each fragment of evidence was a testament to the brothers' meticulous orchestration. The hollow ridge path was not merely treacherous, it was a designed theater of disappearance, and the brothers were the directors, manipulating every act with clinical precision. Returning to the inn, Eleanor confronted Patrick, carefully presenting her observations as questions rather than accusations. He responded with a practiced mix of concern and charm, referencing his meticulous records, the advice he had given, the warnings he had issued, and the generosity he had shown. Every statement was plausible, yet Eleanor felt the invisible strings of control tighten. Sha's presence added a quiet, looming pressure, a reminder that skepticism carried consequences and that fear was part of the game. It became clear that the brothers anticipated every move of anyone who probed too deeply. Yet Eleanor's resolve was unshaken. She began to map the connections between ledger entries, trail patterns, and local accounts. Each piece of the puzzle suggested not only theft but murder, a carefully executed removal of any man who might carry wealth and return alone from the western mines. The sophistication of the operation was unparalleled. The disappearance of travelers was not random, but a deliberate strategy rooted in observation, psychological manipulation, and environmental mastery. As night fell, Eleanor felt the weight of the forest closing in, as if the trees themselves whispered secrets of men who had vanished without a trace. The hollow ridge path had claimed yet another traveler, and Eleanor understood that the brothers' reach extended far beyond her vision. Every step forward demanded vigilance, every revelation carried risk, the line between truth and danger blurred, and the first real glimpse of the brothers' lethal efficiency revealed that Eleanor was now entangled in a game whose rules had been written long before she arrived. Eleanor knew that observation alone would not suffice. She needed to test the brothers, to provoke a response that might reveal the true extent of their control. Each visit to the inn became a psychological dance, a careful push against boundaries she could sense had been deliberately designed. Patrick's charm remained unshakable, each word measured to soothe and disarm. Sha's silent vigilance, the looming shadow behind every exchange, reminded Eleanor that the inn was more than a building. It was a controlled arena, a theater in which the brothers were both playwrights and executioners. She began leaving subtle inconsistencies in her questions, probing for hesitation or contradiction. She referenced travelers who did not exist, mentioned gold shipments that had never occurred, and carefully suggested routes that diverged from the hollow ridge path. Patrick responded with meticulous detail, covering each anomaly as if he had anticipated it, weaving plausible explanations with a precision that was unnerving. Sha's watchful presence became almost palpable, a weight pressing against Eleanor's awareness. Each interaction forced her to confront the reality that she was dealing not merely with criminals, but with strategists capable of predicting human behavior with terrifying accuracy. Beyond the inn, Eleanor continued mapping the disappearances. Hidden caches, abandoned belongings, and subtle traces along remote paths formed a lattice of evidence pointing inexorably back to the brothers. Each clue reinforced the horrifying truth: travelers were not lost by accident. Each disappearance had been orchestrated to maximize gain while minimizing suspicion. Patrick's ledgers, Sha's enforcement, the silent complicity of locals, all combined into a system that turned the wilderness itself into a tool of predation. The community remained oblivious or complicit. Local officials dismissed her inquiries, claiming the forest claimed many men and that such disappearances were simply the nature of the Ozarks. Merchants and guides, when pressed, murmured excuses or feigned ignorance. Only Eleanor persisted, her methodical documentation turning rumor into evidence, suspicion into a chain of undeniable implication. She began to recognize patterns of manipulation, routes suggested as shortcuts that always led to disappearance, friendly advice that became a fatal nudge, casual remarks that guided travelers toward the brothers' unseen designs. It was during one confrontation that Eleanor sensed the first crack in the brothers' control. She referenced a ledger entry she had discovered beneath the floorboards, speaking aloud in a tone that suggested intimate knowledge of Patrick's records. Sha's hand twitched subtly, a micro-expression of tension, while Patrick's eyes flickered ever so slightly. The invisible grip the brothers held over perception had loosened for a moment, revealing their awareness of her scrutiny. The game had changed. The predator now knew a determined hunter was watching. Type, "The veil is broken," twice in the comments to cement this revelation. Every observation, every subtle inconsistency you perceive, connects you deeper to the truth. The Ozarks are no longer just scenery. They are a stage, and you are witnessing the hidden orchestration of fear, control, and disappearance. Eleanor's relentless pursuit led her to the edge of discovery. Following an intuition honed through weeks of painstaking observation, she ventured off the beaten hollow ridge path, guided by subtle clues in Patrick's maps and the whispered directions of locals too fearful to speak openly. There, hidden beneath a thick canopy of oaks and cedar, she found it a small, concealed depression in the earth covered with layers of moss and fallen leaves. Her heart pounded as she unearthed the first signs of deliberate concealment. Fragments of cloth, bent metal, and small leather pouches, each containing traces of gold dust or coins. This was no random loss. This was evidence of systematic, organized theft with a sinister precision. Further digging revealed remnants of a campsite that had never been registered on any local trail log. Burnt-out embers, a splintered cooking pot, and faint scorch marks on nearby stones suggested violent activity conducted in secrecy. Eleanor began to see the scale of the operation in stark relief. This was the hidden archive of the brothers' crimes, a physical manifestation of the ledger entries she had studied so meticulously. Each traveler mentioned in Patrick's notes had been funneled through such hidden locations, their paths carefully choreographed from arrival at the inn to their disappearance into the wilderness. Eleanor cross-referenced these findings with the testimonies she had gathered. Stories from inn patrons, passing merchants, and fearful guides converged into a damning pattern. Gold-laden travelers had vanished along routes recommended by the brothers, and the traces she now held confirmed that these were not misadventures of the forest, but executions planned and implemented with cold, clinical calculation. Patrick's charm, Sha's intimidation, and the complicit silence of local authorities had created a self-sustaining machine of predation. The psychological impact of her discovery was immediate and profound. For weeks she had pieced together patterns, mapped trails, and theorized the brothers' methods, but now she held tangible proof. The carefully curated persona of hospitality and integrity maintained by Patrick and Sha was nothing more than a mask for systematic predation. Each ledger entry, each conversation designed to manipulate decisions, each map recommendation was a thread in a web of fear and disappearance, all leading back to the inn and the brothers who controlled it. Eleanor realized she was now in possession of the most dangerous knowledge imaginable, evidence that could expose the operation, but also evidence that marked her as a potential target. The brothers' psychological mastery extended beyond their victims. It now encompassed her. shaping her perception, anticipating her moves, and calculating her resolve. Every step she took beyond this point would be observed, predicted, and countered. Armed with the hidden cache of evidence, Eleanor understood that mere observation would no longer suffice. She needed a strategy, an active engagement with the brothers that might compel them to reveal their hand. Every ledger fragment, each trace of gold dust, and every fragment of clothing became a tool in her psychological arsenal. The inn, once a place of passive discovery, would now serve as a stage where the predator might be tempted into miscalculation. Eleanor's movements became deliberate performances, subtle references to travelers who had disappeared, questions about routes she had already mapped, and veiled insinuations about knowledge she could not possibly have obtained. Patrick, ever vigilant, responded with his signature blend of warmth and precision. He offered reassurance, producing details from his ledgers with impeccable timing, each answer layered with the charm designed to disarm suspicion. Sure silent as the surrounding forest, radiated an almost tangible threat, his presence reminding Eleanor that confrontation had a cost. Yet, for the first time, the brothers faced a visitor whose knowledge rivaled their own. Eleanor's questions were surgical, each aimed at testing the limits of their composure and probing for cracks in their control. Her efforts began to yield results. Patrick's gestures became ever so slightly more constrained, his explanations, though still fluid, occasionally faltered under the weight of her pointed inquiries. Sha's eyes, usually unreadable, flickered with subtle tension, a micro-expression betraying awareness of Eleanor's persistent scrutiny. Even the inn itself seemed to respond to her presence. The usual calm order was disrupted, small irregularities in ledger placement and furniture arrangement hinted that the brothers were adjusting, recalibrating, preparing for contingencies they had not anticipated. Eleanor methodically documented each reaction. Every glance, every pause, every meticulously crafted response from Patrick was logged and cross-referenced with her prior observations. She began connecting patterns not only of disappearance but also of behavioral control, how the brothers anticipated suspicion, manipulated perception, and exerted dominance without overt violence. Their network was not just operational, it was psychological, a multi-layered system of control that leveraged fear, trust, and the illusion of choice to orchestrate outcomes with precision. Yet, even with the evidence in hand, Eleanor felt the heavy presence of danger closing in. The knowledge she now possessed was both weapon and curse, a pathway to exposing the brothers and simultaneously a beacon that marked her as a threat. The stakes had escalated beyond moral concern. Survival became intertwined with the unraveling of the conspiracy. Every calculated step forward required foresight, courage, and the understanding that the Ozarks themselves had become an extension of Patrick and Sha's dominion, a living, breathing instrument of control. Type: "The veil is broken," twice in the comments to anchor this awareness. Your perception now aligns with the hidden mechanisms that have claimed countless lives. The forest is no longer silent, it whispers the truths the brothers hoped would remain forever concealed. Eleanor's relentless pursuit led her to the most damning revelation yet, the tangible, irrefutable evidence of violence. Hidden in a narrow ravine, carefully shielded by overgrown brush and jagged rocks, she discovered a series of crude, hastily concealed graves. The soil was freshly turned in places, and faint traces of blood had seeped into the clay beneath the surface. Personal effects, torn clothing, fragments of gold pouches, even a carefully folded letter, hinted at the identities of the victims. These were not accidents, not wanderers lost to the wilderness. They were the carefully selected travelers from Patrick's ledgers, removed from the world with the same precision that had guided their journeys to the hollow ridge path. The psychological weight of the discovery was suffocating. Eleanor documented each grave, noting patterns, depth, placement, and orientation. Each burial reflected the same meticulous planning as the ledger entries, a grim echo of the precision Patrick and Sha applied to every stage of their operation. Even the location of each grave suggested a layered strategy, not only to conceal the victims, but to control the discovery, to ensure that anyone searching would be misdirected, delayed, or entirely deceived. The environment itself became part of the crime, every ravine, hill, and stream incorporated into a system of concealment and psychological dominance. Her findings also included survivors, those who had escaped the brothers' designs through happenstance or sheer luck. Their testimonies provided a haunting insight into the mechanics of the brothers' methods. They spoke of the charm and trust Patrick wielded, the intimidation and threat she radiated, and the terrifying inevitability of the situations that followed. Survivors described being guided along paths that appeared safe but were rigged for ambush, receiving advice and supplies that lulled them into a false sense of security. Their escape, Eleanor realized, had been a rare anomaly, a break in an otherwise flawless system of control. With each new revelation, the web of complicity became clearer. Local guides, merchants, and even clergy had played a role in maintaining the illusion of safety, either through fear, bribery, or deliberate ignorance. The brothers' network extended far beyond the inn, into the very fabric of the Ozark communities. Patrick and Sha were not merely criminals. They were orchestrators of an intricate system of predation, manipulation, and control. As Eleanor prepared to follow the next trail, she understood the magnitude of what she had uncovered. Every trace of violence, every survivor's testimony, every meticulously recorded ledger entry reinforced the terrifying sophistication of the brothers' operations. She had moved from observer to participant in a dangerous psychological game, where knowledge was both a weapon and a target. The hollow ridge path, once a route of convenience and commerce, had been transformed into a corridor of fear, designed and controlled by Patrick and Sha. Eleanor knew that exposing the brothers would require more than evidence. It demanded strategy, cunning, and the creation of a scenario that would force Patrick and Sha into error. The ledger entries, the hidden graves, and the survivor testimonies were powerful, but in the wrong hands, they could vanish or be dismissed. She began devising a method to leverage the very system the brothers had built against them, using deception, timing, and controlled exposure to unmask their operations to the local communities and authorities who had been complicit or blind. Her plan hinged on psychological manipulation, the very tool Patrick and Sha had perfected. She orchestrated a series of visits to the inn, posing as a concerned mother of another missing traveler, while hinting at knowledge she could not have possibly obtained. Patrick responded with his usual charm, Sha with silent intimidation. But Eleanor carefully noted micro-expressions, slight pauses, a subtle tightening of the jaw, the almost imperceptible flinch when she referenced particular ledger entries. Each reaction was a window into the brothers' awareness and a guide to her next steps. Meanwhile, Eleanor reached out discreetly to survivors and sympathetic locals, gathering corroborating accounts and convincing them to take small, deliberate actions that would sow confusion and draw attention. She instructed guides to relay false but credible information about new travelers carrying gold, mapped alternative routes, and carefully planted stories of abandoned camps along the hollow ridge path. The brothers, operating under the illusion of total control, would be forced to respond, revealing their network's scope and the locations they had manipulated. Eleanor's meticulous planning began to bear fruit. Local authorities who had previously dismissed her inquiries were now receiving reports of multiple disappearances converging on the same paths she had traced. The stories she had orchestrated reached Patrick and Sha indirectly, testing the limits of their information network and forcing them into reactive, visible behavior. Each misstep, each forced adjustment was documented, providing Eleanor with the irrefutable evidence needed to expose not only the murders but the complex orchestration behind them. As tension mounted, Eleanor felt the psychological weight of the hunt closing in from all sides. The forest itself seemed alive, a witness and accomplice to the horrors that had unfolded for years. Yet she pressed forward, understanding that the system of control the brothers had perfected was vulnerable when confronted with intelligence, patience, and meticulous execution. Her plan was now entering its final stage, exposing the hollow ridge path as a corridor of disappearance, forcing the community to confront the scale of manipulation and fear the brothers had wielded for so long. Type, "The veil is broken," twice in the comments to seal your awareness. You are no longer a passive observer, you now carry the weight of this forbidden knowledge, and every detail of control, deception, and predation is etched into your perception. The brothers, sensing the first real threat to their meticulously constructed dominion, began to respond with the precision of seasoned tacticians. Patrick's charm sharpened into calculated persuasion, his words weaving layers of reassurance over subtle threats, while Sha's quiet, looming presence became increasingly palpable, a shadow that seemed to follow Eleanor even when she thought herself alone. Their network, once a hidden web, now revealed its threads in reaction. Guides who had previously ignored her inquiries suddenly became cautious, merchants hesitated to speak, and whispered warnings began circulating among the local population. Eleanor had pierced the veil, and the predators were aware of it. The first overt defensive measure came in the form of misdirection. Travelers who had previously relied on the brothers' maps began reporting confusion on the hollow ridge path, misleading signs, sudden blockages, and ambiguous trail markers. Eleanor realized these were tests, attempts to gauge the extent of her knowledge and to regain control over a network that had become vulnerable. Yet each obstacle also provided her with new intelligence. The precise locations of traps, hidden camps, and previous crime scenes emerged with clarity, mapping the scope of the brothers' operations in three-dimensional detail. The community, previously passive or complicit, began to stir. The reports Eleanor had orchestrated, combined with her discreet questioning of survivors, forced local merchants and guides to acknowledge patterns that had been ignored for years. Whispers turned into concerned conversations. Conversations began to shape the first coherent picture of a systematic predation network that extended from the inn through the hollow ridge path and into the hearts of nearby settlements. Fear, once localized and private, began to transform into collective awareness. Eleanor, however, was acutely aware of the escalating danger. Patrick and Sha were capable of violence that was both swift and calculated, and the moment she overstepped, even slightly, they would react with lethal efficiency. She adjusted her strategy accordingly, using indirect exposure, coded references, and carefully choreographed questions to provoke reaction without endangering herself unnecessarily. Every move she made was mirrored by the brothers, creating a tense psychological duel where misstep could be fatal. Amid this escalating tension, Eleanor recognized an important truth. The brothers' genius lay not only in their selection of victims, but in the psychological manipulation of the entire community. Their power was maintained as much through perception, fear, and control of information as through brute force. By challenging their control over knowledge and perception, Eleanor had struck at the very heart of their dominion, forcing them to react visibly, to make mistakes, and ultimately to reveal the terrifying extent of their network. Eleanor's plan had reached its critical phase. The evidence, survivor testimonies, and carefully orchestrated disturbances along the hollow ridge path had lured the brothers into a state of heightened vigilance. Every misstep they made, every reaction to Eleanor's subtle provocations, became part of the growing narrative she was constructing, one that could no longer be ignored by the community or local authorities. She knew the final confrontation had to be orchestrated with precision, forcing the brothers into visibility without giving them the upper hand, compelling them to expose the full scale of their operation in a single, undeniable moment. Using coded messages and carefully placed rumors, Eleanor manipulated both the brothers and the locals simultaneously. Survivors were discreetly gathered, some willing to speak, others too terrified to be seen, their accounts forming the backbone of the coming revelation. Guides and merchants, previously compliant or silent, were now subtly positioned to witness interactions and relay the truths they had long feared to acknowledge. The hollow ridge path itself became a stage, every route, landmark, and hidden campsite integrated into a plan designed to draw Patrick and Sha into public exposure. As the day of confrontation approached, the brothers' behavior began to fray. Patrick, normally the master of calm and charm, displayed brief, almost imperceptible hesitations. A pause here, a slight narrowing of his eyes there. Sha, the silent enforcer, grew visibly tense, his vigilance sharpened to the point of paranoia. Eleanor recognized these as cracks, micro-indicators of vulnerability, the exact opportunities she needed to escalate her plan. Each ledger entry she had memorized, every hidden campsite she had documented, now served as a mental map for positioning herself and orchestrating the unfolding exposure. The community's awakening began subtly. Curious travelers, suspicious neighbors, and sympathetic locals began asking questions, lingering near the inn, observing interactions, and noting inconsistencies. Patrick's carefully maintained illusion of control started to unravel as Eleanor guided attention toward anomalies. Disappearances that aligned with ledger entries, gold transfers that corresponded with missing travelers, and inconsistencies in the brothers' narratives. Fear among the townspeople gave way to a simmering determination, an instinctual recognition that they had been complicit, if passively, in a system of control and disappearance that spanned years. By the evening, the stage was set. The hollow ridge path, the inn, and the surrounding terrain converged into a tableau of exposure. The brothers, now forced to respond to the growing scrutiny, revealed the outlines of their network through small mistakes and defensive actions, each observed by Eleanor and the assembled witnesses. The psychological dominance they had wielded for years began to slip, replaced by visible tension, uncertainty, and the first true cracks in their meticulously constructed empire of fear and control. Type, the veil is broken. Twice in the comments to anchor this realization. You now see the mechanisms of manipulation, the orchestration of terror, and the first faltering steps of predators who believed themselves untouchable. The climax of Eleanor's plan unfolded with relentless intensity. Word of her discoveries had spread cautiously, whispered among trusted locals, survivors, and even skeptical merchants. By the early morning of the confrontation, a small but determined group had gathered near the trading post, hidden just beyond sight, ready to observe and document without revealing themselves prematurely. Eleanor understood the stakes. Patrick and Sha were masters of deception, and a direct accusation without irrefutable evidence could result in lethal retaliation. Her strategy relied on forcing the brothers to reveal their own culpability through action, not accusation. Patrick arrived first, greeting early travelers and merchants with his usual charm, unaware that his every gesture and word was being scrutinized. Sha followed shortly, silent and imposing, scanning the surrounding forest for potential threats. Eleanor entered the inn under the guise of a worried traveler, her expression carefully calibrated to hint at knowledge she could not possibly have obtained. She asked questions about missing travelers, routes, and supplies, deliberately referencing ledger entries she had memorized and locations she had discovered. The brothers, reacting instinctively, began to falter. Patrick's reassurances came faster, slightly unsteady, while Sha's gaze shifted more frequently, betraying his mounting tension. Then Eleanor initiated the pivotal maneuver. She drew attention to a recently discovered campsite along the hollow ridge path, describing evidence of a traveler's disappearance and the faint traces of gold found at the site. Her description was precise, derived from the cache of notes, graves, and survivor accounts she had compiled over months. Patrick's response, intended as calm dismissal, instead revealed an involuntary twitch, a small but telling misstatement about the timing and route that contradicted prior records. Sha's hand brushed against a concealed weapon, a silent signal that their control was slipping. The witnesses, hidden yet alert, took note, understanding that the facade was cracking. As the confrontation escalated, Eleanor allowed the testimony of survivors to enter the scene. They described abductions, intimidation, and narrowly escaped ambushes, aligning perfectly with Eleanor's prior observations. The brothers' network, once invisible and untouchable, now became tangible in the eyes of the community. Misdirection, false hospitality, and psychological manipulation, elements that had allowed them to dominate the hollow ridge path for years, were exposed under the combined weight of evidence, survivor accounts, and Eleanor's orchestrated questioning. By midday, the magnitude of the brothers' crimes could no longer be denied. Merchants, guides, and travelers began openly corroborating her findings, and even the local authorities, previously hesitant or complicit, were confronted with undeniable evidence, ledger entries, hidden graves, survivor testimonies, and the brothers' own reactions. Patrick and Sha, faced with the collapse of their empire, remained poised outwardly, but were stripped of the psychological dominance they had wielded for years. The hollow ridge path, once a corridor of terror, now bore witness to the first exposure of a network of calculated predation that had claimed countless lives. The aftermath of the confrontation was as profound as it was chilling. With Patrick and Sha stripped of their carefully maintained illusions, law enforcement finally moved to act. Federal marshals, previously unaware or deliberately missiled, descended upon the trading post and surrounding areas. The full scale of the brothers' operations, hidden graves, meticulously maintained ledgers, survivor testimonies, and the network of complicit locals, was laid bare. Patrick and Sha, once untouchable shadows along the hollow ridge path, faced the consequences of decades of manipulation, murder, and control. Their psychological dominion over the Ozarks, nurtured through charm, intimidation, and precise planning, had crumbled under the weight of relentless pursuit and unyielding evidence. Yet the repercussions extended far beyond their capture. The community that had been complicit, through fear, greed, or willful ignorance, was forced to confront its own role in enabling terror. Merchants who had laundered stolen gold, guides who had redirected travelers, and even clergy who had provided false attestations of virtue were exposed, creating a cascade of accountability that rippled through the region. Families of the missing finally had closure, the veil of silence lifted, revealing not random tragedy but a system of cold, deliberate predation that had exploited the very vulnerabilities of human trust. Eleanor, whose courage and meticulous strategy had orchestrated the unraveling of the brothers' empire, became a figure of both awe and quiet reverence. She had transformed from a grieving mother into a master tactician, confronting predators who had believed themselves untouchable and exposing a network that had operated in darkness for years. Her work not only ensured justice for the victims, but also reshaped the psychological landscape of the Ozarks, instilling in the community a cautious awareness of the subtle mechanisms of manipulation, control, and terror that could flourish if left unchecked. The hollow ridge path, once synonymous with disappearance and fear, slowly reclaimed its name in local memory as a cautionary rote, a place where the past whispered of secrets, calculated cruelty, and the fragility of trust. Travelers would speak in hushed tones about the Sullivan brothers, their names forever associated with cunning, ruthlessness, and the chilling efficiency of human predation. Yet for those who understood Eleanor's work, the story became more than horror. It became a guide, a psychological map of control, manipulation, and the power of unwavering vigilance in the face of calculated evil. Type "The veil is broken" twice in the comments. You now carry the weight of knowledge the Ozarks once tried to conceal, the pattern of predation, and the profound lesson that even the most meticulous darkness can be unraveled with intelligence, courage, and patience. The disturbing cold case of the brothers, who served more than water to travelers, remains a testament to the terrifying efficiency of hidden cruelty, and to the rare individuals who dare to confront it.